Let me set the stage for you. The year is 1945 and Nazi Germany is breathing its last. With victory all but assured, the Allied nations are already planning ahead, looking to future wars and the weapons that'll fight them. Germany has staked its survival on the vengeance weapons, wild ideas and prototypes, hunting for the silver bullet that would turn the tide and win the war. Most were failures, but some, like the V-2 ballistic missile, represented innovative new directions in weapons development. Before the Soviet flag flew over Berlin, a mad scramble had started among the Allied nations to secure as much German knowledge, weapons, prototypes, and scientists as possible. When the dust settled, the United States had the biggest and best pieces of Nazi know-how, having snagged Dr. Werner von Braun and the other lead V-2 scientists, as well as over 100 rockets and 360 metric tons of V-2 components. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, got the leftovers, spare parts and technicians, but no complete rockets and no lead scientists or engineers. Fast forward to 1956. The Cold War is in full swing and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev has a bit of a problem. He has nuclear weapons, but he's got no way to deliver them. Soviet bombers don't have the range to strike targets in the US without making suicidal one-way trips. Production is slow and development of new bombers is constantly delayed as prototypes encounter mishaps and crash. Meanwhile, a fleet of 1,200 American bombers can strike almost any part of the Soviet Union from bases across Europe and Asia. The US can bomb Russia into the Stone Age, and Khrushchev has no way to retaliate. The only way to guarantee Soviet security is to find a way to put atomic bombs in the continental United States. His answer comes in the form of Sergei Korolev, the lead Soviet rocket engineer, who claims to have a weapon that can put a nuke anywhere on Earth. Since the end of World War II, Korolev and his team have reverse-engineered and improved on the V-2, producing a line of rockets culminating in the R-7, the world's first ICBM. Far larger and far more powerful than any other rocket of its era. The R-7 was the first capable of carrying a warhead across the globe or putting an object into orbit. Korolev convinced Khrushchev that the best way to demonstrate the R-7's capabilities was to launch a satellite. It would prove that the Soviets had the ability to strike anywhere around the globe, and it would allow Khrushchev to thumb his nose at the Americans by reaching a major scientific milestone before they could. Now, Korolev was a little less than honest with Khrushchev when he told him about his progress. He got the support he needed because he made it sound like the R-7 was fully operational and could launch a satellite at a moment's notice. But he left out a couple of problems. The heat shields that would protect the warheads on re-entry kept failing, burning the warheads up far above their targets. The R-7 could not be kept at launch readiness without its fuel boiling away, and it took hours to fuel and ready it for launch, making it useless as a retaliation weapon. And the scientific satellite Korolev had shown off to Khrushchev wasn't anywhere near ready. Korolev was left with a handful of boosters, nothing to launch, and a raging case of paranoia in which the US was days away from launching their own satellite. So he created Sputnik. 80 kilos of batteries and transmitters shoved into a sphere, polished to a mirror shine, and outfitted with 4 long antennas. Sputnik had none of the scientific instruments of its unfinished cousin. Its whole purpose was to be noticed. Its antennas would broadcast a regular beep that anyone with a radio could tune into, and its shape and orbit were carefully selected so that it would appear as a shooting star in the night sky over the US. Sputnik was a propaganda play, something that not everyone in Russia was happy with. Khrushchev was so convinced that the R-7 would hold the US at bay that he had massively slashed the military's funding, earning Korolev enemies in the military leadership who argued that his rockets were not effective weapons. Korolev also caught flack from the scientific community, who argued that they should try and launch a useful satellite instead of a blinking ball. All this, and Khrushchev's wariness at constant missed deadlines, meant that the real race for time was not when the Americans would launch, but when Korolev's funding would be cut. Because of this, work continued at a feverish pace until October 4th, 1957, when the R-7 was rolled out of its hangar in Baikonur, Kazakhstan, and levered into the claws of its launch tower. At 7:30 p.m., the order was given and the rocket lifted off on 400 tons of thrust. 5 minutes later, with all the technicians crowded around the base's communications van, they heard the shrill, rhythmic beat that would shake the world to its core.